Sometimes the wild chooses us long before we choose it. Deep in Montana's Glacier National Park, where ancient pines pierce clouds and silence holds secrets older than memory, 17-year-old Maya Blackwater should have been safe in her warm bed. Instead, she lay unconscious on the frozen floor of a forgotten barn, her breath forming ghostly clouds in the bitter October air. Her father, Chief Ranger Tom Blackwater, had always warned that these mountains demanded respect, but nothing had prepared him for what the search team found at first light. 10 wolves, massive and still as carved stone, formed a perfect circle around his daughter's body. Their yellow eyes tracked every movement of the approaching rescuers, but they didn't snarl or retreat. They simply watched, waited, protected. Maya had been searching for her missing brother when the blizzard struck, but now something far stranger than weather patterns was at play in these ancient woods. The wolves hadn't touched her. They'd guarded her through the killing cold of a mountain night. And when Maya finally stirred awake, the lead wolf's eyes met hers with an intelligence that made her heart stop. What connects a teenage girl to creatures that should fear humans above all else? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The lead wolf's amber gaze held Maya's for what felt like an eternity, and in that moment she could swear she heard something, not words exactly, but a deep, resonant understanding that seemed to flow between them like water finding its level. Safe now. Pack protects. The thought wasn't hers, couldn't be hers, but it settled into her mind with such certainty that she almost nodded in acknowledgement before catching herself. Maya! Her father's voice cracked like a whip across the frozen air, shattering the strange communion. Don't move, sweetheart. Don't even breathe wrong. She could see him now through the gaps between the wolves, Tom Blackwater in his ranger jacket, his weathered face pale with fear and something else. Wonder, maybe, or terror. Behind him, 3 other rangers stood frozen, tranquilizer guns raised but useless. Nobody wanted to be the first to fire into a circle of wolves protecting what they'd come to save. Maya tried to sit up, and immediately the world tilted sideways. Her head felt stuffed with cotton, and her left ankle screamed protest when she shifted weight onto it. The events of the previous night came flooding back, the frantic search through the backcountry, calling Ethan's name until her voice gave out, the sudden wall of snow that turned familiar trails into alien landscapes. She remembered stumbling into this barn, remembered the bone-deep cold seeping through her jacket, remembered thinking she'd never see sunrise. But she'd never remembered the wolves arriving. How long? She started to ask, but her throat felt raw, stripped. The wolf closest to her, the leader, she somehow knew, turned his massive head at the sound of her voice. Up close, she could see the silver threading through his dark coat, the old scar running along his muzzle. He was ancient by wolf standards, maybe 12 or 13 years old, and his presence commanded absolute respect from the pack. When he took one deliberate step back, the others followed suit, maintaining their circle but giving her room to breathe. 20 hours, her father called out, his voice carefully controlled. Maya, we're going to get you out of there, but I need you to stay very, very still while we figure out how to... The old wolf's ears pricked forward, and a low rumble emerged from his chest. Not a growl, more like a conversation. The other wolves responded, in kind, a chorus of soft whines and huffs that sounded almost consultative. Maya found herself understanding fragments of it. Danger scent fading. Human pup stronger now. Time to... She shook her head violently, sending fresh waves of dizziness crashing over her. This was impossible. She was hallucinating, that was all. Hypothermia could cause delusions, couldn't it? People saw and heard things that weren't there when their core temperature dropped too low. But the wolves were real enough. She could smell them. Wild musk and pine needles and something older, earthier. Could feel the warmth radiating from their bodies despite the October cold. Could see the careful intelligence in their movements as they began to shift formation. "Dad," she called out, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I think they're going to let me go." Even as she said it, she knew it was true. The pack was preparing to withdraw, but not out of fear of the approaching humans. This felt more like a job completed, a duty fulfilled. The old wolf met her eyes one final time, and again that strange non-voice whispered through her consciousness, "Remember, young speaker, when the moon calls, the pack answers." Then, as silently as they must have arrived, the wolves melted away into the tree line. One moment they were there, magnificent and impossible, and the next Maya sat alone on the barn floor with only trampled snow to prove they'd ever existed. Her father was beside her in seconds, his strong arms pulling her against his chest while he checked for injuries with practiced efficiency. "Jesus, Maya, what were you thinking coming out here alone? When the storm hit and you didn't come home—" "Ethan," she managed to say. "Did you find Ethan?" The way his hands stilled on her shoulders told her everything she needed to know. "The search teams are still looking, sweetheart, but with this weather and the terrain—" Tom's voice trailed off, but Maya heard what he wasn't saying. Her 15-year-old brother had been missing for 36 hours now in some of the most unforgiving wilderness in North America. Every hour that passed made his survival less likely. But as the other rangers helped her to her feet and began the careful trek back to their vehicles, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the wolves knew something the humans didn't. The way they'd looked at her, protected her, spoken to her in that impossible language of instinct and understanding, it all felt connected to Ethan somehow. Connected to something much larger than a teenager getting lost on a hiking trail. The mountains held secrets, her father had always said. Maya was beginning to suspect she was one of them. The ride back to park headquarters passed in a blur of radio chatter and concerned voices, but Maya barely heard any of it. She pressed her face against the cold window of the ranger vehicle, watching the familiar landscape roll by, the same trails she'd hiked since she could walk, the same peaks that had shaped her skyline for 17 years. Everything looked exactly as it always had, but something fundamental had shifted. The mountains seemed to be watching her now with ancient, knowing eyes. "Maya!" Her father's voice pulled her back to the present. They were parked outside the small medical clinic in West Glacier, and she realized she'd been sitting there for several minutes, staring at nothing. "Doc Henderson needs to check you over. Make sure you don't have any signs of frostbite or hypothermia." She nodded and followed him inside, submitting to the familiar routine of small-town medical care. Dr. Henderson had been patching up the Blackwater family for as long as she could remember, everything from Ethan's broken arm when he was 8 to her father's stitches after that incident with the injured grizzly 2 summers ago. The elderly physician's hands were gentle but thorough as he examined her ankle, checked her pupils, took her temperature. "Remarkably good condition, considering," he murmured, making notes on his clipboard. "Minor sprain, some dehydration, but nothing serious." "You're a tough one, Maya Blackwater, just like your old man." Her father managed a weak smile. "She gets that from her mother." The mention of her mom sent a familiar pang through Maya's chest. Sarah Blackwater had been gone 3 years now, cancer, swift and merciless, but her absence still echoed through their small family like a missing note in a song. She'd been the one who smoothed Tom's rough edges, who knew exactly what to say when Maya pushed too hard against the boundaries of their wilderness life. She'd also been the one who understood Maya's strange affinity for animals, who never questioned why injured creatures sought out their daughter, or why Maya always seemed to know which trails the wildlife would take. "I want to get back out there," Maya said as they drove toward home. "The search teams need to know about the northwestern quadrant near Bowman Lake. Ethan mentioned wanting to explore that area last week." "Absolutely not." Tom's voice carried the tone that brooked no argument. "You're staying home and resting. The teams have it covered." Maya stared at him. "Dad, he's my brother. I can't just sit around while—" "While what? While you nearly get yourself killed like you did last night." Tom pulled into their driveway harder than necessary. "Maya, when I saw you in that barn, surrounded by those wolves, Christ, I thought I was going to lose you both." Their house sat at the edge of the park boundary, a modest log cabin that her great-grandfather had built in 1923. It had been passed down through 4 generations of park rangers, each adding their own touches: her grandfather's stone fireplace, her father's workshop, her mother's herb garden that Maya still tended every spring. This was supposed to be her legacy too, her future written in timber and tradition. But lately, the walls felt more like a cage than a home. "I'm not a child anymore," Maya said as they climbed the front steps. "I know these mountains better than half the search team. I could help if you'd just—" "Drop it, Maya." Tom held open the door, his jaw set in that stubborn line she knew too well. "You're 17 years old. You're my responsibility, and I won't have you taking risks like that again." Inside, the house felt hollow without Ethan's presence. No gaming sounds from his room, no trail mix crumbs on the kitchen counter, no heated debates about whether wolves were cooler than bears, his opinion, or if bears were obviously superior, hers. Maya wandered into his room and sat on the unmade bed, surrounded by his things: geology textbooks, camping gear, the collection of unusual rocks he'd been gathering since he was 7. Her phone buzzed with texts from friends at school, all variations of the same theme: "OMG, are you okay? And heard you were missing. And call me." She scrolled through them without responding. How could she explain what had happened? How could she tell them about the wolves, about the voice in her head that couldn't possibly have been real? At Glacier High, Maya Blackwater was known for 3 things: her ability to predict when the cafeteria would serve decent food, her habit of bringing injured animals to biology class, and her complete disinterest in college applications. While her classmates stressed about SAT scores and acceptance letters, Maya had always assumed she'd follow the family path. Junior Ranger, then Full Ranger, spending her life protecting the wilderness that had raised her. But now, staring at Ethan's empty room while search helicopters thundered overhead, that future felt as distant as the peaks outside her window. Something was calling to her from the deep places of the forest, something the wolves had recognized and awakened. And Maya was beginning to understand that her ordinary world, the only world she'd ever known, might be nothing but an illusion. The knock on the front door came at exactly 7:43 p.m., sharp and authoritative in a way that made Maya's stomach clench. She'd been picking at her father's attempt at comfort food, canned soup and grilled cheese, when the sound cut through their strained dinner conversation about everything except the one thing that mattered. Tom pushed back from the table, his ranger instincts already putting him on alert. "Stay here," he told Maya, but she was already following him to the front door, drawn by a certainty she couldn't explain. 3 figures stood on their porch, silhouetted against the dying light. Maya recognized the woman in the center immediately, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the park's chief wildlife biologist, her usually warm demeanor replaced by something urgent and unsettled. Flanking her were 2 men Maya had never seen before, one in an expensive-looking coat that screamed government official, the other younger, carrying equipment cases that looked far too sophisticated for standard park service work. "Tom," Dr. Vasquez said without preamble, "we need to talk about what happened this morning, about Maya." The older man stepped forward, extending a leather credential wallet. "Agent Marcus Webb, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Special Investigations Unit. This is Dr. James Chen from the National Wildlife Research Center. May we come in?" Maya felt her father's reluctance radiating from him like heat, but protocol was protocol. He stepped aside, gesturing them into their small living room. The space suddenly felt cramped, invaded by the weight of official attention that had never crossed their threshold before. "Coffee?" Tom offered, falling back on wilderness hospitality, even as his voice carried an edge. "This isn't a social call," Agent Webb said, settling into their worn armchair with the casual authority of someone accustomed to taking charge of situations. "We've received some very unusual reports about the incident this morning. 10 wolves, forming a protective circle around a human, remaining stationary for over 20 hours, showing no fear of approaching rescue personnel, his pale eyes fixed on Maya with uncomfortable intensity. This behavior is unprecedented in recorded wolf-human interactions." Dr. Chen opened one of his cases, revealing recording equipment and what looked like specialized cameras. We'd like to interview Maya about her experience. Document exactly what occurred during her time with the pack. Absolutely not. Tom's voice carried the same immovable quality as the mountains outside. My daughter has been through enough. She needs rest, not interrogation. Mr. Blackwater, Dr. Vasquez interjected, her tone gentler but no less urgent, this isn't about interrogation. What happened this morning? It defies everything we know about wolf behavior. If Maya experienced something unusual, something that might help us understand. Understand what? Maya found herself speaking, her voice cutting through the adult's careful diplomatic dance. What exactly do you think happened out there? Agent Webb leaned forward, his expression shifting from bureaucratic efficiency to something hungrier. That's what we're hoping you can tell us. But first, I need you to know that anything discussed here falls under federal wildlife protection statutes. Sharing details with unauthorized individuals could result in serious legal consequences. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Maya felt something cold settle in her chest, not fear exactly, but recognition. This was the moment her father had always warned her about, though he'd never put it into words. The moment when the outside world noticed their family, when the careful balance they'd maintained between the ordinary and the extraordinary finally tipped. There are legends, Dr. Chen said quietly, his accent carrying traces of somewhere far from Montana. Indigenous stories from dozens of North American tribes about individuals who could communicate with wolves. The Blackfeet called them wolf speakers. The Cherokee had a different name, but the concept was the same. People born with the ability to bridge the gap between human and animal consciousness. Maya's hands went cold. The voice she'd heard in the barn, the impossible understanding that had flowed between her and the pack leader, suddenly it felt less like hallucination and more like inheritance. That's ridiculous, Tom said, but Maya caught the slight tremor in his voice. Maya has always been good with animals, but this is just... Your wife's maiden name was Little Wolf, Agent Webb interrupted, consulting a tablet he'd produced from his briefcase. Sarah Little Wolf Blackwater, daughter of Joseph Little Wolf, grandson of Samuel Little Wolf, who appears in several historical accounts as a tribal liaison specializing in unusual wildlife situations. The room went dead silent. Maya stared at her father, watching decades of carefully maintained secrets crumble in his expression. Her mother's family history had always been vague, a collection of half-told stories and deflected questions that Maya had never pushed too hard to understand. The wolves are still out there, Dr. Chen said softly. Our tracking equipment shows the pack hasn't moved more than a mile from the barn where they found you. That's not normal dispersal behavior. It's like they're waiting for something. Maya stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. Through the living room window, she could see the dark outline of the mountains against the star-scattered sky. Somewhere out there, Ethan was still missing. Somewhere out there, 10 wolves were defying their natural instincts for reasons these scientists wanted to study and catalogue and control. What do you want from me? She asked. Agent Webb smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. We want you to help us understand what you are, Maya, and in return we might be able to help you find your brother. The weight of Agent Webb's words settled over Maya like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. What you are. As if she was some specimen to be catalogued, some puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into the world she'd always known. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth radiating from their stone fireplace. I don't know what you think I am, she said, backing toward the window. But I'm just me, Maya Blackwater. I graduate in 7 months. I help Dad with ranger duties. I can't even parallel park without hitting the curb. But even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at her. The voice in the barn hadn't been her imagination. She was certain of that now. The way the wolves had moved, responded, communicated with her through something deeper than sound or sight. the absolute certainty she'd felt about their intentions, their pack dynamics, their ancient patience. Maya. Her father's voice was gentler now, but she could hear the fractures in it. What exactly did you experience out there? With the wolves? She turned to face him. This man who had raised her with such careful boundaries, such deliberate normalcy. You knew, didn't you? About Mom's family. About whatever this is supposed to be. Tom's silence was answer enough. Dr. Vasquez shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Agent Webb watched their family drama unfold with the clinical interest of a predator evaluating prey. Your mother made me promise, Tom said finally. She said the old ways brought nothing but trouble. That you and Ethan deserved normal lives, safe lives. She wanted to break the cycle. What cycle? Maya's voice cracked. Dad, I need to understand what's happening to me. Dr. Chen cleared his throat softly. In the historical accounts, wolf speakers were both revered and feared. They served as mediators between human settlements and wolf territories, but they also disappeared, frequently. The wilderness would call them back, and they'd choose their pack bonds over human society. Maya felt something sharp and cold twist in her stomach. Are you saying I'm going to disappear? Like Ethan? We don't know what happened to your brother, Agent Webb said, but the timing is suggestive. 15 years old, right around the age when these abilities traditionally manifest in family bloodlines. If he inherited the same genetic markers you appear to carry... Stop! Maya pressed her palms against her temples. Just stop. This is insane. Wolves don't have magical powers. People don't talk to animals. This is the 21st century, not some fairy tale. But her protests felt hollow even to her own ears, because deep down, in a place she'd never examined too closely, Maya had always known she was different, the way injured animals found her, the way she could predict where wildlife would move through the park, the dreams she sometimes had of running through moonlit forests on 4 legs instead of 2. Her phone buzzed against the coffee table, a text from her best friend Jess coming over with ice cream and terrible movies. Don't argue. The normalcy of it hit Maya like a physical blow. Jess, who worried about chemistry tests and whether Tyler Morrison would ask her to homecoming. Jess, who had never heard voices that shouldn't exist or been protected by creatures that should have seen her as prey. How could Maya explain any of this to her? How could she maintain friendships, graduate, have any kind of normal future if she was supposedly some kind of supernatural interpreter for apex predators? The pack is still out there, Dr. Chen repeated, waiting. That's not coincidence, Maya. They're responding to something they recognize in you. And if I don't want whatever that is... Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. If I just want to be normal? To find my brother and go back to my regular life? Agent Webb's expression hardened. I'm afraid normal may not be an option anymore. The pack's behavior has attracted attention from multiple agencies. There are people who would be very interested in studying both you and the wolves, with or without your cooperation. Working with us is your best chance of maintaining some control over the situation. The threat was clear, wrapped in bureaucratic politeness but unmistakable. Maya looked at her father, saw the helpless rage building in his face. This was exactly what her mother had feared, exactly why she'd tried to bury their family's history beneath layers of ordinary small-town life. And Ethan, Maya whispered, if I help you, if I let you study me like some lab rat, you'll really help find him? We have resources the standard search teams don't, Dr. Chen said. Tracking technology, satellite imagery, specialized personnel. If your brother is out there, we can find him. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. Outside, she could almost sense them, 10 wolves maintaining their vigil, defying nature itself for reasons she didn't want to understand. Somewhere beyond them, Ethan was lost in the wilderness that had shaped their entire lives. And here, in their living room, strangers were asking her to become something that might cost her everything she'd ever thought she was. The mountains held secrets, her father had always said. Maya was beginning to realize that some secrets, once awakened, could never be buried again. When Maya opened her eyes, the decision was already crystallizing in her chest like ice forming on a mountain lake. The familiar weight of her ordinary life, homework assignments, weekend shifts at the visitor center, college application deadlines she'd been ignoring, suddenly felt as insubstantial as morning mist. "I'll do it," she said quietly. The words seemed to echo in their small living room, changing everything. Tom's face went pale, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Agent Webb leaned forward with barely concealed satisfaction. Dr. Chen simply nodded, as if he'd been expecting this moment since he'd walked through their door. "Maya, no." Her father's voice carried a desperate edge she'd never heard before. "You don't understand what you're agreeing to. Once this starts, once they get their hooks in you—" "Dad." She turned to face him, saw decades of carefully constructed protection crumbling in his expression. "Ethan is out there, and whatever's happening to me, ignoring it won't make it go away. Those wolves aren't going to just forget about me and wander back to their territory." As if summoned by her words, a long, mournful howl drifted through the night air. Then another, and another, until the mountainside echoed with voices that had no business being so close to human habitation. Maya felt something deep in her chest respond to the sound. Not fear, but recognition, like hearing her name called in a language she'd forgotten she knew. "They're calling to you," Dr. Chen observed, his equipment already picking up readings from the vocal displays outside. Classic pack communication patterns, but the context is completely unprecedented. Agent Webb was making notes on his tablet. "We'll need to establish a base of operations, somewhere close enough to the pack's current position for regular observation, but with proper facilities for our research team." "Research team?" Maya's stomach dropped. "How many people are we talking about?" "Small group, maybe 6 specialists, wildlife behaviorists, acoustic analysts, a few others with relevant expertise." Webb's casual tone didn't match the magnitude of what he was describing. "We'll try to keep disruption to a minimum." Maya looked around their living room, her mother's quilted cushions, her grandfather's hunting photographs, the wood-burning stove that had heated 4 generations of Blackwaters through Montana winters. In 24 hours, their private family sanctuary would become ground zero for a federal investigation into something she still didn't fully understand. "There's an old ranger station about 3 miles from the barn," Tom said reluctantly. "Hasn't been used since the boundary restructure in '98, but the basic infrastructure is intact. Power, water, radio communication. Perfect." Webb made another note. "We can be operational by tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow afternoon. The speed of it made Maya dizzy. This morning she'd been a high school senior whose biggest worry was whether she'd have to retake calculus. Now she was agreeing to become a test subject for people who thought she might be some kind of supernatural mediator between species. "What exactly will you need from me?" she asked. Dr. Chen opened his second equipment case, revealing sensors and monitoring devices that looked more like science fiction than wildlife research. Initial baseline testing, neurological responses, physiological markers during human-animal interaction, acoustic analysis of any vocalizations you might produce. Nothing invasive, just data collection. And then? Then we try to establish controlled contact with the pack. See if we can document and quantify whatever communication method you appear to be using. Another howl cut through the night, closer this time. Maya could swear she heard something specific in it, not just generic wolf communication, but a message meant for her. "We're waiting," it seemed to say. "We're ready when you are." Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Jess. "Dad won't let me drive over tonight because of the weather. But ice cream date tomorrow after school. You can tell me everything." Maya stared at the message, feeling the last threads of her normal life stretching and beginning to snap. How could she explain to her best friend that she wouldn't be in school tomorrow because she'd be learning to talk to wolves? How could she maintain any connection to the world she'd grown up in when she was about to step into something that existed in the spaces between myth and reality? "I need some air," she said abruptly, heading for the back door. Maya. Her father started to follow, but Agent Webb held up a hand. Let her go. She needs time to process. Maya stepped onto their back porch, the October night sharp and clear around her. Above, stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt, the same constellations she'd learned to navigate by during camping trips with her family. But everything felt different now, as if she was seeing the wilderness through new eyes. In the distance, dark shapes moved through the moonlight. 10 wolves, maintaining their impossible vigil, waiting for her to finally accept what she was becoming. Maya Blackwater took a deep breath of mountain air and stepped off the porch into the unknown. The first step off the porch felt like crossing an invisible threshold. Maya's bare feet touched frost-brittle grass, and immediately she sensed them. 10 distinct presences arranged in a loose perimeter around her property, not threatening but alert, protective. "We see you," whispered something that wasn't quite a voice in her mind. Finally, she froze, heart hammering against her ribs. The communication hadn't come as words, but as pure meaning, flowing into her consciousness like water finding the cracks in stone. Behind her, she could hear the low murmur of voices from the living room, her father arguing with Agent Webb, probably trying to establish boundaries that everyone knew were already shattered. A shadow detached itself from the tree line 50 yards away. The pack leader, massive and silver-touched, moving with the fluid confidence of an apex predator who had never known fear. Maya should have been terrified, should have run screaming back to the safety of walls and locked doors and the illusion that humans stood separate from the wild things that ruled the darkness. Instead, she found herself walking toward him. Careful. The mental voice carried new complexity now, layers of meaning she couldn't quite pass. The Watchers see everything. Maya glanced back toward the house, where the warm glow of windows revealed silhouettes moving behind glass. Agent Webb's small research team would arrive tomorrow, transforming her life into a series of monitored interactions and documented phenomena. But tonight, for just a few more hours, this strange new ability belonged only to her. The pack leader stopped when 20 feet still separated them, close enough that Maya could see the intelligent amber of his eyes, the careful way he held himself, ready for anything, committed to nothing. Around the property's edges, the other 9 wolves had shifted position, creating what she suddenly understood was a complex communication network. Each animal served as both guardian and messenger, their pack bonds functioning like an organic internet spanning miles of wilderness. "Your littermate calls from the deep places." The alpha's mental voice carried undertones of something Maya didn't want to identify, urgency, maybe fear. The old pathways wake, the spirits that sleep in stone and root taste blood in the wind. "Ethan." Maya's whispered word frosted in the cold air. "You know where he is." Images flooded her mind, not her own memories, but something older, wilder. A teenage boy stumbling through snow-heavy forest, his human scent slowly changing, becoming something the wolves recognized. Ancient caves where shadows moved independently of their sources. Stone markers placed by people who understood that some boundaries should never be crossed. "He walks the threshold paths," came the pack leader's response. "Neither fully of your world nor ours. The spirits test him." "What spirits?" Maya stepped closer, desperation overriding caution. "What do they want?" But before the wolf could answer, the back door burst open. Tom's voice cut through the night. "Maya, get away from that animal!" The pack leader's ears flattened, lips drawing back to reveal teeth designed for crushing bone. The protective network around the property shifted, 9 shadows flowing closer with predatory grace. Maya found herself caught between 2 forms of protection, her father's desperate human instincts and the ancient loyalty of creatures who had decided she belonged to them. "It's okay," she called back, raising her hands in what she hoped looked like a calming gesture. "He's not going to hurt me." "Maya, that is a wild wolf. They don't form bonds with humans. They don't." Agent Webb appeared beside her father, and Maya saw the gleam of a tranquilizer gun in his hands. "Don't move, Maya. We need to document this interaction. but if that animal shows any sign of aggression—" The pack leader's growl started low and rose until it seemed to shake the mountain itself. The other wolves answered, their voices weaving together into something that made Maya's bones vibrate. She felt their collective rage at the threat, their readiness to defend her even if it meant exposing themselves to human weapons. No, the mental command burst from Maya with shocking force, directed at both species. "Everyone stop." The silence that followed was absolute. Webb lowered his weapon, looking stunned. Tom stood frozen on the porch, his face cycling through expressions Maya couldn't read. The wolves remained motionless, but their attention had shifted to her with laser focus. All of them, human and animal alike, were staring at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. In that moment, Maya realized she had just exercised a form of authority she didn't understand. The pack recognized it. Webb's equipment was probably registering readings that would keep his research team busy for months. And somewhere in the wilderness, Ethan was moving deeper into a world that might claim him permanently if she didn't learn to navigate these new abilities fast enough to reach him. The pack leader's mental voice whispered one final message before he melted back into the shadows. "Tomorrow we hunt. Be ready." As the wolves dispersed into the night, Maya stood alone in the frost-sharp air, finally understanding that, ready or not, she was about to discover what it meant to be the bridge between worlds that were never supposed to touch. The pack leader's words echoed in Maya's mind as she stood in the sudden emptiness of her backyard, the frost-sharp air burning her lungs. "Tomorrow we hunt. Be ready." Ready for what? She had no training, no understanding of these abilities that seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. The wolves expected something from her, something she wasn't sure she could deliver. "Maya!" Her father's voice carried a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Come inside, please." She turned to find Tom standing alone on the porch, Agent Webb having retreated into the house with his equipment. Her father's face looked older in the moonlight, carved with worry lines she'd never noticed before. For 17 years, he'd carried the weight of her mother's secrets, building walls around their family that were now crumbling with each supernatural revelation. "Dad, I know." He held up a hand, his ranger's composure finally cracking. "I saw what just happened, the way they responded to you, the way you—" He struggled for words. "Your mother could do that too, not as strongly, but when she was about your age, she could project feelings, commands. It scared her so badly she refused to explore it further." Maya climbed the porch steps slowly, her feet numb from the cold. "Is that why she left the reservation? Why she never told us?" "She was terrified you and Ethan would inherit it. Said the old stories were full of children who got lost between worlds, who chose the wilderness over their own families." Tom's voice broke slightly. "I promised her I'd keep you safe from all this. I failed." Inside, Agent Webb was setting up monitoring equipment while Dr. Chen reviewed footage on his laptop. Maya caught a glimpse of herself on the screen, standing impossibly close to a massive predator, both of them utterly calm in a situation that should have triggered every survival instinct humans possessed. "The neural activity readings are remarkable," Dr. Chen was saying to Webb. "During the interaction, her brainwave patterns shifted into frequencies we've only seen in deep meditation states. But the most interesting part is this." He pointed to a series of spikes on his display. "These match the acoustic patterns in the wolves' vocalizations. It's as if they're synchronizing on some level we don't fully understand yet." "Can you isolate the mechanism?" Webb asked. "Not yet, but tomorrow, with the full team here, we can run more comprehensive tests. If we can map the neural pathways involved, maybe even replicate them." "I'm not a lab rat." Maya's voice cut through their discussion like ice. Both men turned, suddenly remembering she was more than just a fascinating subject to be analyzed. "Of course not," Webb said smoothly. "You're a partner in this research. But Maya, what you demonstrated tonight, the level of control you exercised over multiple apex predators simultaneously, that has implications beyond just finding your brother. This could revolutionize our understanding of human-animal communication, maybe even consciousness itself. Maya sank into her mother's old armchair, feeling the weight of impossible expectations settling on her shoulders. Outside, she could still sense the wolves' presence, distant but watchful. Tomorrow they would hunt, and somehow she was supposed to be ready to join them. But how could she prepare for something that existed outside every framework she'd ever known? Her phone buzzed. Another text from Jess. "Okay, now I'm worried. You haven't answered any of my messages. Are you okay?" Maya stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could she possibly say? "Sorry, can't talk. Just discovered I'm some kind of supernatural wolf whisperer, and tomorrow I might have to track my missing brother through magical wilderness dimensions." The gulf between her old life and whatever she was becoming felt impossibly vast. "I need to make some calls," she said finally. "Tell people I won't be in school tomorrow." Maybe longer. Webb and Dr. Chen exchanged glances. "How much are you planning to tell them?" Dr. Chen asked carefully. "Nothing." The word came out harder than Maya intended. They wouldn't believe it anyway. She retreated to her bedroom, closing the door on the low murmur of scientific discussion. Her space felt alien now. The college pennants on her walls, the stack of unfinished homework on her desk, the photo of her and Ethan from last summer's camping trip where they looked so normal, so unaware of the legacy written in their blood. Maya picked up the photo, studying Ethan's grinning face. Had he felt it too, this pull toward something wild and unknowable? Was that why he'd ventured so far into the backcountry, following trails that led beyond mapped territory? A soft scratch at her window made her look up. One of the wolves sat in the moonlight just beyond the glass, not the pack leader, but a smaller female with distinctive white markings. Their eyes met, and Maya felt that now familiar flutter of connection, like tuning into a radio frequency that had always been there but never accessible before. "The hunt begins at dawn," came the wordless message. "Your brother's scent grows cold. Time runs short." Maya pressed her palm against the window, feeling the barrier between worlds growing thinner with each heartbeat. Tomorrow would bring federal agents and scientific equipment and tests designed to quantify the impossible. But tonight belonged to older truths, to the recognition passing between predator and prey that sometimes the lines blur beyond all recognition. She had 12 hours to become someone capable of walking between worlds. It would have to be enough. Maya's hand lingered on the cold window glass as the white-marked wolf disappeared into the shadows. 12 hours. In 12 hours she would either step into a legacy she didn't understand or watch her brother vanish forever into whatever liminal space had claimed him. She turned from the window and began pulling gear from her closet. Hiking boots, thermal layers, the backcountry pack her father had given her for her 16th birthday. Each item felt weighted with significance, as if she were preparing for more than just a wilderness excursion. This was equipment for crossing thresholds, for venturing into territories where human maps ended and older geographies began. A soft knock interrupted her preparations. "Maya?" Tom's voice carried through the door, rough with exhaustion and worry. "Come in." Her father entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. The familiar ritual felt surreal against the backdrop of everything that had changed, but Maya accepted the warmth gratefully. Tom settled into a desk chair, looking around at the hiking gear spread across her bed. "Planning to leave before the research team arrives?" he asked quietly. "Planning to find Ethan before it's too late." Maya met his eyes. "The wolves know where he is, Dad. They're offering to take me to him. How can I say no to that? Because once you cross certain lines, you can't uncross them." Tom's voice held the weight of old pain. "Your mother tried to warn me about this. Said there were places in these mountains where the boundaries get thin, where people with your kind of gift can get lost between what's real and what's something else." Maya folded a thermal shirt with sharp, precise movements. "So I should just abandon him? Let whatever took him have him permanently?" "I'm not saying that. I'm saying," Tom ran his hands through his graying hair, "I'm saying I don't know how to protect either of you anymore. 20 years I've been a park ranger, and I thought I understood these mountains. But tonight I watched my daughter have a conversation with apex predators, and I realized I don't understand anything. Through the thin walls, they could hear Webb and Dr. Chen setting up their equipment, their voices a constant reminder that tomorrow would bring scrutiny and documentation and the reduction of mystery to data points. Maya's abilities would become case studies, her connection to the wolves transformed into publishable research. What if I can't control it? The fear she'd been suppressing finally broke through. What if I go out there and the pack dynamic changes me somehow? What if I come back different? Tom set down his mug and reached for her hands. Maya, you've been different your whole life. The way you could calm spooked horses when you were 6. How you always knew which trails the elk would take during migration. Your mother's gift didn't skip a generation. It just waited until you were strong enough to handle it. Strong enough? Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. I can barely handle chemistry class. How am I supposed to handle walking between worlds? Because you're a Blackwater. Because these mountains are in your blood, and because... Tom's voice caught. Because your brother is counting on you to figure it out. Outside, the first pale hints of dawn touched the horizon. Maya felt something shift in the air pressure, a change that had nothing to do with weather patterns and everything to do with the approaching hunt. Somewhere in the darkness, 10 wolves were stirring, preparing for a journey that would test every assumption about the boundaries between human and wild. Maya's phone buzzed one final time. Jess, whatever's going on, you know I'm here for you, right? Call me when you can. This time, Maya typed back, I love you. Take care of yourself. I'll explain everything when I can. She powered off the phone and tucked it into her desk drawer. Where she was going, the familiar connectivity of her human world would be worse than useless. It would be a dangerous distraction. Tom stood as she shouldered her pack, his face cycling through expressions of pride and terror. If you're really doing this, I am. Then remember that no matter how far you go, no matter what you become out there, you still have a home here. You still have a father who loves you. His voice broke completely. Both of you, bring him back, Maya. Bring my son home. Maya hugged him fiercely, breathing in the scent of coffee and flannel and 20 years of bedtime stories. When she pulled away, she could see her own fear reflected in his eyes, along with something else, acceptance of a truth he'd been fighting since the night she collapsed in that barn. She was no longer entirely human, and finding Ethan would require her to explore just how far from humanity she was willing to travel. Dawn was breaking as Maya Blackwater walked out her front door, leaving behind the world of federal agents and scientific equipment and stepping into something far older and infinitely more dangerous. The wolves were waiting. The wolves materialized from the dawn mist like ghosts given substance, their forms shifting between shadow and flesh as Maya stepped into the frost-brittle grass. 10 pairs of amber eyes tracked her movement, but something felt different from their midnight gathering. Where she had expected the pack leader's commanding presence, she found only 8 wolves arranged in a loose semicircle. 2 were missing. Maya's heart stuttered as she recognized which 2, the white-marked female who had visited her window and another she'd come to think of as the scout, a lean grey male who always positioned himself at the pack's far edge. The absence felt like missing teeth in a smile, wrong in a way that made her stomach clench. Where are they? The question formed without conscious thought, broadcast toward the remaining pack with desperate intensity. The pack leader stepped forward, his massive head low, ears flattened in a posture Maya had never seen from him before. When their minds connected, the wave of grief and rage nearly brought her to her knees. Images flooded her consciousness, tranquilizer darts whistling through pre-dawn darkness, the 2 wolves dropping in mid-stride government vehicles with Wyoming plates disappearing down mountain roads. No, the word escaped as barely a whisper. Oh God, no. Behind her, the front door slammed. Tom's voice cracked across the morning air. Maya, get back here, now! She spun to find her father running toward her, his face twisted with panic. Webb's team didn't wait for official arrival time. They've been tracking the pack since before dawn. They took 2 of them. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. While she had been preparing to hunt for Ethan, while she had been saying goodbye and gathering courage, federal agents had been setting traps around her family's property. The wolves who had trusted her enough to reveal themselves, who had offered to help find her brother, had been captured like common animals. "The hunting paths are broken," came the pack leader's mental voice, tinged with something Maya had never heard from him before: defeat. "Without the scout pair, we cannot track the deep places where your littermate walks. The old routes require 10 to navigate safely." Maya felt the weight of failure crushing down on her chest. The supernatural symmetry that had made this pack unique, 10 wolves for 10,000 years of legend, had been shattered by scientists who saw them only as subjects to be studied. Without their full number, the pack couldn't access whatever mystical pathways had led to Ethan. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Miss Blackwater, this is Agent Webb. We have secured 2 specimens for immediate study. Your cooperation will ensure their humane treatment. Report to the ranger station within the hour." The message felt like a knife between her ribs. Cooperation. As if she had any choice, as if the wolves' lives weren't now hanging in the balance of her compliance with federal demands. The remaining 8 wolves began to pace, their distress bleeding through the pack bond in waves of frustrated energy. Maya could feel their need to hunt, to follow ancient instincts that demanded action, warring against the impossible reality of their truncated numbers. They were like an orchestra, missing critical instruments, still capable of making music but unable to play the complex symphonies their heritage required. "We cannot reach the threshold places," the pack leader repeated, his mental voice heavy with defeat. "Your littermate moves beyond our touch." "No." Maya's voice gained strength as rage began to burn through her despair. "There has to be another way. You found him before we were complete. The pack bond spans dimensions only when all 10 hearts beat as one. Now we are diminished, broken." Maya watched the sun climb higher, each passing minute taking Ethan further from any hope of rescue. The federal team had not only captured 2 wolves, they had destroyed the supernatural mechanism that made finding Ethan possible. Every moment she had spent preparing for this hunt had been rendered meaningless by tranquilizer darts and government efficiency. Behind her, more vehicles were pulling into the driveway. She could hear radios crackling, official voices discussing containment protocols and research priorities. The world she had tried to leave behind was reasserting itself with bureaucratic precision, trapping her between impossible choices. Save the captured wolves by surrendering to federal control, or watch them suffer in laboratories while her brother disappeared, forever, into whatever mystical realm had claimed him. Either path led to a loss that would shatter what remained of her family. The pack leader lifted his muzzle toward the mountains, where Ethan wandered lost between worlds. His howl rose like a funeral song, joined by 7 other voices, in a harmony of grief and defeat. The sound carried across the peaks, announcing to whatever ancient spirits might be listening that the old agreements were broken, the sacred bonds severed by human interference. As the last notes faded into silence, Maya understood with crystalline clarity that she had failed before her journey even began. The wolves' howls still echoed in Maya's mind when the revelation struck her with the force of a lightning bolt. She staggered backward, her hands flying to her temples as understanding crashed through her consciousness like a dam bursting. 10 hearts beat as one. The pack leader's words reverberated, but now she heard them differently. Knotten hearts, 10 heartbeats, 10 rhythms synchronized across the boundary between human and wolf, between the physical world and whatever liminal space had claimed Ethan. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of approaching federal vehicles. It was never just the wolves. The pack leader's amber eyes locked onto hers, and she felt his sudden, sharp attention like a spotlight. Through their connection, she sensed his confusion shifting toward something else, recognition, perhaps even hope. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as the pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Every story her grandmother had told, every legend Tom had reluctantly shared about wolf speakers, had focused on the human component. The children born with the gift weren't observers of the pack. They were the pack. The 10th heartbeat, the bridge between worlds. "The first night," she said, her voice growing stronger as certainty flooded through her. "In the barn, when you found me, there weren't 10 wolves guarding me. There were 9 wolves and 1 human learning to be part of something larger." The pack leader stepped closer, his massive frame trembling with an energy that felt like the moment before thunder. Through their bond, Maya felt his mind opening to her more completely than ever before, and what she found there shattered every assumption she'd held about herself. She saw herself as the wolves saw her, not as Maya Blackwater, the park ranger's daughter who struggled with chemistry and worried about college applications. She saw the 10th, the missing piece that had called to them across miles of wilderness, the completion of an ancient pattern that had waited 17 years for her to mature enough to claim it. "The balance," she breathed. It was never about 10 wolves. It was about 9 wolves and 1 wolf speaker working together. The federal agents didn't just capture 2 pack members. They broke the symmetry that lets the pack access the threshold places. But as understanding dawned, so did a more terrible realization. If she truly was the 10th member of this supernatural configuration, then the captured wolves weren't just prisoners. They were severed pieces of a living organism, and she could feel their pain like phantom limbs, a constant ache of disconnection that threatened to tear her apart from the inside. Maya closed her eyes and reached out with senses she was only beginning to understand, searching for the 2 missing wolves. At first, there was nothing but static and distance. Then, faintly, like voices calling from the bottom of a well, she felt them, terrified, sedated, trapped in steel cages that rolled down mountain highways toward laboratories where men in white coats would reduce their ancient magic to data points and tissue samples. The white-marked female was fighting the tranquilizers, her mind a storm of panic and rage. The scout was unconscious but dreaming, and his dreams were full of running through landscapes that existed nowhere on any human map. Both of them were calling out through whatever mystical frequency connected the pack, sending distress signals that only Maya seemed able to receive. "I can feel them," she said, opening her eyes to find all 8 remaining wolves watching her with an intensity that made the air shimmer. "They're alive, but they're scared and they're broken, cut off from the rest of us." Agent Webb's voice carried across the dawn air, sharp with authority. "Maya Blackwater, step away from the wolves and report to the command vehicle immediately." Maya ignored him. Through the pack bond, she could sense something shifting in the remaining wolves' understanding. Where moments before there had been only defeat, now she felt a growing excitement, a recognition that sparked between their minds like electricity. "The pack can be restored," came the pack leader's mental voice, but now it carried undertones Maya had never heard before, something that felt almost like reverence, but not as it was always meant to be. "What do you mean?" Maya asked, though part of her already knew the answer and was terrified by its implications. "You are not learning to join the pack," the leader replied. "The pack has been waiting to complete itself through you, to become what wolf speakers and their bonds were always destined to be, a single entity spanning both worlds." Maya felt the truth of it settling into her bones like winter cold. The federal agents thought they were studying some kind of unusual animal communication, but they were actually witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a new form of consciousness that existed simultaneously in human and wolf awareness. Behind her, boots crunched on frost-brittle grass as Webb's team approached. In front of her, 8 wolves waited for her to make the choice that would define not just her future, but the very nature of what she was becoming. She was no longer entirely human, but she wasn't becoming a wolf either. She was becoming something altogether new. The moment stretched like a held breath, federal agents approaching from behind, while 8 wolves waited before her, and Maya felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, not fear. She had moved beyond fear into something clearer and more dangerous, purpose. "Stop right there, Miss Blackwater." Agent Webb's voice carried the weight of authority, but Maya heard it as if from a great distance. Her consciousness was expanding, stretching to encompass the pain of 2 captured packmates while simultaneously deepening her connection to the 8 who remained. She turned to face Webb, and the look in her eyes made him take an involuntary step backward. Where he expected to find a frightened teenager, he found something that watched him with the patient calculation of a predator. "You made a mistake," Maya said quietly. Her voice carried an odd resonance, as if multiple throats were speaking in perfect harmony. "You thought you were capturing animals, but you severed pieces of something much larger." Dr. Chen appeared at Webb's shoulder, tablet in hand, her face bright with scientific excitement. "The neural synchronization patterns we're detecting are unlike anything in the literature. If we can document the full range of—" "Bring them back." Maya's words cut through Chen's enthusiasm like a blade. "Bring back the 2 you took, or I'll show you exactly what wolf speakers are capable of when the pack bond is threatened." Webb's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. "Miss Blackwater, you need to understand that this is now a matter of national security. The phenomena we're documenting here—" He never finished the sentence. Maya's consciousness suddenly exploded outward, her awareness rushing along invisible pathways that connected her to every wolf within a 100-mile radius. Not just her pack, every wolf. The shocked recognition that flooded back to her through those connections nearly brought her to her knees. She wasn't just the 10th member of this particular pack. She was a focal point, a living nexus through which the ancient network of wolf consciousness could finally reintegrate itself. Scattered packs throughout Glacier National Park were turning toward her location, drawn by a call they had been waiting generations to hear. The speaker wakens came a chorus of mental voices, some strong and near, others faint with distance. The long silence ends. Maya felt her human identity stretching, expanding to accommodate something vast and wild and impossibly ancient. But instead of losing herself in the wilderness of that expanded consciousness, she found herself becoming more than she had ever been. The civilized part of her mind, the part that understood chemistry and worried about college applications, didn't disappear. It became the organizing principle that gave structure to the untamed power flowing through her. "My God," Dr. Chen whispered, staring at her tablet. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts. It's like she's become some kind of biological transmitter." Maya smiled, and the expression held nothing human. Not a transmitter, a translator. She gestured toward the 8 wolves, who had begun to move in a pattern too complex for human eyes to follow. "You wanted to study the pack bond? Then study this." The wolves' movements created a living mandala around Maya, their bodies tracing geometric patterns that seemed to fold space in impossible ways. With each step, the air grew thicker, charged with an energy that made the hair on everyone's arms stand on end. The morning light began to bend strangely, casting shadows that pointed in directions that defied the position of the sun. Webb raised his weapon, but his hand was shaking. "Stand down! All of you, stand down now!" Maya's laugh echoed from multiple throats, her own and those of 8 wolves who had begun to vocalize in harmony. "You still don't understand. This isn't aggression, this is awakening." Through the expanding network of consciousness, she felt the 2 captured wolves stirring in their steel prisons miles away. The tranquilizers that had subdued them were wearing off, and their terror was transforming into something else as they felt Maya's presence flowing through the pack bond like electricity through copper wire. "Hold on," she sent to them across the distance. "I'm coming." But she wasn't going anywhere. She was bringing them to her. The geometric pattern the wolves had been tracing suddenly snapped into perfect alignment, and Maya felt reality hiccup around them. Space folded like origami, bringing distant places close enough to touch. Through the distortion, she could see a government transport vehicle pulled over on a mountain highway, agents shouting in confusion as their cargo containers began to resonate like struck bells. Impossible, Dr. Chen breathed, her tablet forgotten as she stared at the impossible vista opening before them. This violates every known law of physics. Maya's eyes blazed with inner fire. Your laws don't apply here anymore. The pack was whole again. Distance meant nothing. Capture meant nothing. The wolf speakers had finally remembered what they were truly capable of when human intelligence merged completely with wolf consciousness. And somewhere in the folded space between worlds, Maya felt her brother's presence stir in recognition. The fold in space shimmered like heat mirages rising from summer asphalt, and through it stepped two wolves that should have been hundreds of miles away. The white-marked female emerged first, her fur still bearing traces of tranquilizer foam, her eyes wild with the disorientation of forced sleep. Behind her came the scout, moving with the careful deliberation of someone testing whether the ground beneath their feet was real. Agent Webb's weapon clattered to the frost-hard earth as his hands went slack with shock. "This is impossible," he whispered. They were in reinforced containments, GPS tracked, under military escort. Maya felt the pack's completion like a physical sensation, 10 heartbeats synchronizing into a rhythm that seemed to resonate through the fabric of reality itself. But with that completion came something else, a clarity so sharp it cut through every comfortable lie she had ever told herself about who she was and what she was becoming. "The containments are empty now," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. "Your escort is standing beside their vehicles, staring at steel cages that no longer hold anything but the memory of captivity." Through the pack bond, she could feel Webb's team miles away, their confusion and growing terror as they tried to explain to their superiors how two sedated wolves had simply vanished from locked containers. Security footage would show nothing but empty cages, where moments before there had been massive forms breathing in drugged sleep. Dr. Chen fumbled with her tablet, her scientific excitement warring with the fundamental impossibility of what she was witnessing. The energy readings, "Maya, whatever you've done, you've created a localized distortion in space-time. The quantum implications alone—" "Stop trying to measure this with your instruments," Maya interrupted. The fold in space was already beginning to close, reality reasserting itself like a rubber band, snapping back to its original shape. "You're trying to understand magic with mathematics. It doesn't work that way." The 10 wolves now moved in perfect synchronization around her, their bodies describing patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the 3 her human education had taught her were possible. With each step, Maya felt herself sinking deeper into a form of consciousness that had no name in any human language. But it was the wrongness that stopped her from surrendering completely to that vast, wild awareness. The pack was complete, yes. The captured wolves were free, but something fundamental was still broken, a discordance that rang through the pack bond like a cracked bell. It took her several heartbeats to identify the source, and when she did, ice formed in her stomach. Ethan's absence. The missing piece that had started this entire crisis still echoed through the supernatural configuration like a wound that wouldn't heal. Her brother wasn't just lost in the physical world, he was trapped somewhere in the liminal spaces between human and wolf consciousness, and his displacement was corrupting the very network that should have been able to find him. "The deep paths remain closed," came the pack leader's mental voice, tinged now with something approaching desperation. "Your littermate's presence in the threshold places creates interference. We cannot navigate to him while he remains lost between states of being." Maya felt the weight of understanding settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She had assumed that completing the pack would give her the power to find Ethan. Instead, she was discovering that Ethan's situation was actively preventing the pack from functioning as it should. Every attempt to reach him through the mystical pathways was being scrambled by his own untrained wolf speaker abilities that had awakened without guidance or control. "He's not just lost," she said aloud, the words tasting bitter. "He's becoming something he doesn't understand, and that transformation is poisoning the connections that would let us reach him." Agent Webb had recovered his weapon, but seemed uncertain what to point it at. Maya was still recognizably human, still standing on two legs and speaking English, but the air around her writhed with invisible currents of power that made his trained instincts scream danger. "Miss Blackwater, I'm ordering you to cease whatever process you've initiated. The quantum distortions you're generating could have catastrophic consequences," Maya finished. "Yes, they could." She turned to face him fully, and he saw his own reflection multiplied 10 times in eyes that had become wolf gold. "The question is whether you're more afraid of what I might do, or what will happen if I don't do it." Through the pack bond, she could feel time running out like sand through her fingers. Every moment Ethan remained trapped in the threshold places made his eventual rescue less likely. But the path forward required something she had been trying to avoid. A complete abandonment of her human identity, a final step into a form of consciousness that might not allow her to find her way back to anything resembling the life she had known. The choice was no longer between saving Ethan or protecting herself. It was between saving him or remaining recognizably human, and somewhere in the folded spaces between worlds, she could feel her brother calling her name. Maya closed her eyes and let the last of her human hesitation drain away like water through a broken dam. When she opened them again, Agent Webb stumbled backward as if struck. The golden fire in her gaze had intensified until it seemed to burn with its own light, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of something far older than civilization. "Ethan," she called, not with her throat, but with the entirety of her transformed consciousness. The word rippled outward through dimensions that had no names, carried by wolf song and human will merged into something unprecedented. "Brother, I'm coming." The 10 wolves around her began to move in a pattern that hurt to look at directly, their bodies tracing geometries that folded reality like paper. But this time, Maya didn't just watch. She became the center of the mandala, the living focal point through which the ancient powers could finally express their full potential. Dr. Chen's tablet exploded in a shower of sparks as the electromagnetic field around Maya spiked beyond any measurable limit. "Webb, we need to evacuate. The energy cascade she's generating—" "No," Maya's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You need to witness. Someone has to remember what wolf speakers truly are when the old stories become truth again." The air around them began to shimmer and twist, reality becoming fluid as Maya reached deeper into powers that had been dormant for generations. Through the pack bond, she felt herself dispersing across multiple states of consciousness, part human reason, part wolf instinct, part something altogether new that existed in the spaces between worlds. "Ethan." This time, her call echoed through the threshold places themselves, the liminal realm where her brother had become trapped. She felt him respond, a flicker of recognition across impossible distance, but his answer came back distorted and strange. "Maya, but you're different, changed. I can't find my way back. Everything here shifts and changes, and I think I'm changing with it." Through the mystical connection, Maya could see what her brother was experiencing, a landscape that obeyed dream logic rather than physics, where time flowed in circles and thoughts became visible as shifting aurora across an always twilight sky. Ethan was there, but he was also becoming something else, his human consciousness slowly dissolving into the raw creative potential that existed between the worlds. "Hold on to who you are," Maya sent back, pouring every ounce of her will into the communication. "I'm coming to get you, but you have to remember your name. Remember your life. Remember that you're human." But even as she said it, Maya realized the terrible irony. She was asking Ethan to hold on to his humanity while she abandoned her own. To reach him in the threshold places, she would have to become something that could navigate realms where human logic held no power. The wolves' pattern reached a crescendo, and suddenly the world broke. Reality shattered around them like glass, revealing the underlying framework of existence, streams of possibility that flowed like rivers of light, connecting every living thing in an endless web of cause and effect. Maya felt herself expand into that web, her consciousness spreading across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Through her enhanced awareness, she could perceive the threshold places as Ethan experienced them, not as the chaotic nightmare she had imagined, but as a realm of pure potential where thoughts and dreams took on substance. It was beautiful and terrifying, a place where the boundary between self and universe became dangerously thin. There, she found him at last, a flickering flame of human consciousness that was slowly being absorbed into the cosmic background noise of universal possibility. He was seated beside a stream that flowed upward into a sky full of swimming stars, his form wavering between the boy she knew and something made of moonlight and shadow. Maya? His mental voice was fading, becoming part of the wind that whispered secrets in languages that predated human speech. I've been waiting so long, but I can't remember. Why was I supposed to leave? This place is so beautiful. The seductive nature of the threshold realm hit Maya like a physical blow. No wonder Ethan had become lost. This was a place where every fear and limitation of mortal existence simply dissolved away, where consciousness could expand infinitely without consequence. The temptation to simply let go, to become one with the eternal dance of possibility, was almost overwhelming. But through the pack bond, she felt the anchoring presence of 10 wolves who had risked everything to help her reach this moment. Their wild hearts beat in synchronization with her own, reminding her that love and loyalty existed in both worlds, and that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. Ethan, she called with the full power of her transformed voice. It's time to come home. Behind her, in the rapidly fading human world, Agent Webb watched in stunned silence as Maya Blackwater stepped out of reality entirely, taking her wolf pack with her into realms that existed beyond the reach of any earthly authority. The final test had begun, the confrontation. In the threshold realm, where physics bent to will and dreams took form, Maya faced her greatest enemy, not Agent Webb or government forces, but the seductive promise of infinite possibility itself. The place sang to her, just as it sang to Ethan. Here, consciousness could expand without limit, touching the fundamental forces that shaped reality. Every molecule in her transformed body hummed with the desire to dissolve into that cosmic symphony, to become one with the eternal dance of creation and destruction. Why fight it? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, spoken in harmonies that rewrote themselves with each syllable. It was the threshold realm itself, the accumulated whispers of every consciousness that had ever touched this space between worlds. You have struggled so long with the boundaries of mortality. Here, there are no boundaries. Here, you can be everything. Maya felt her sense of self wavering. The 10 wolves that had followed her into this impossible space moved restlessly around her, their forms shifting between flesh and starlight. Even they were being affected, their wild certainty beginning to fragment in a place where certainty itself was just another form of limitation. Maya, please. Ethan's voice reached her across the streams of upward-flowing light. He was closer now, but also less substantial, his human form becoming translucent as the realm slowly absorbed him. Don't make me go back. I remember now, the fear, the smallness, the way everything hurt all the time. Here, nothing hurts. Here, I can be anything. The truth hit Maya like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Ethan being lost. He was choosing to stay lost, seduced by a realm where pain and limitation simply didn't exist, and she could feel herself beginning to understand why. In the threshold places, her father's disappointed silences couldn't touch her. Her mother's death became just another shifting pattern in the cosmic dance, no more significant than any other transformation. You see, the realm whispered, your brother has found wisdom. Release your grip on the illusion of separateness. Join the eternal becoming. But as Maya felt her resolve weakening, The pack bond suddenly blazed with desperate loyalty. The wolves weren't just her companions. They were her anchor to everything that made existence meaningful. Love, duty, the fierce joy of choosing to protect something fragile and precious despite the cost. No, Maya's refusal echoed through dimensions that had no names, carried by a will that refused to bend even in the face of cosmic temptation. Ethan, you're wrong. Pain isn't a flaw in existence. It's proof that what we have matters enough to fight for. She reached for her brother across the flowing streams of possibility, but he pulled away, his form scattering like mist before reforming at a greater distance. "You don't understand," Ethan said, his voice carrying new harmonics as the realm continued to transform him. "I've seen what we could become, not just wolf speakers, but something beyond human and wolf entirely. Why cling to such limited forms?" Around them, the threshold realm began to shift, responding to the conflict between Maya's determination and Ethan's willing surrender. The upward flowing streams became rapids, the star-filled sky darkened with gathering storm clouds, and the very air grew thick with the weight of competing possibilities. Maya realized that her presence here was destabilizing everything. The realm had existed in perfect stasis before she arrived, a place of eternal becoming without the anchor of choice. But she had brought decision into paradise, the terrible human gift of saying no even to perfection. "Choose quickly." The realm's voice carried an edge of something approaching fear. "The contradictions you have introduced cannot be sustained. Either embrace the infinite or be cast back into the prison of singular existence, but do not remain between states. The threshold places cannot hold such discord." Through the pack bond, Maya felt the wolves' growing distress. Their forms were becoming increasingly unstable as the realm's agitation mounted, their consciousness stretching toward breaking points that would scatter them across the cosmic web without hope of reunification. The confrontation had reached its apex. Maya faced a choice that would determine not just her fate and Ethan's, but the nature of consciousness itself in this liminal space. She could surrender to the seductive promise of infinite expansion, saving herself and her pack by becoming something vast and eternal and utterly inhuman. Or she could maintain her grip on individual existence, accepting all its limitations and pain, and somehow find a way to drag her brother back to a reality he no longer wanted. But as the threshold realm pressed against her mind with the weight of eternity, Maya discovered a third option, one that would require sacrificing everything she had gained to save everything that truly mattered. "Ethan," she called one final time, her voice carrying the concentrated essence of every moment of love they had shared. "If you won't come back for yourself, then come back for me, because I can't leave here without you." The realm itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which force would prove stronger, infinite possibility or the stubborn, finite loyalty of a sister who refused to abandon her brother to paradise. The cosmic silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of eternity. Maya felt the threshold realm's impatience growing, reality beginning to fracture around their standoff like ice under pressure. Ethan's form wavered, caught between dissolution and coherence, while her wolf pack's consciousness stretched to breaking points that made her soul ache. Then Maya understood what she had to do. The sacrifice the realm demanded wasn't her humanity or Ethan's freedom, it was the very power that had brought her here. "I'll make you a trade," she said, her voice cutting through the cosmic discord. She addressed not just Ethan but the threshold realm itself. "My wolf speaker abilities, all of them, in exchange for my brother's safe return." The realm's shock rippled through dimensions, colors bleeding from the aurora sky as the impossible offer registered. "You would surrender the gift that defines you, the power that allows you to exist in this space?" Through the pack bond, Maya felt 10 wolves crying out in anguish. They understood what she was proposing, complete severance from the mystical network that connected them, the dissolution of bonds that had become more fundamental to her than breathing. She would return to the human world not just changed, but diminished, cut off forever from the wild consciousness that had made her whole. Maya, no. Ethan's form solidified as the magnitude of her sacrifice reached him. For the first time since she'd found him, he sounded fully human. Don't you understand what you're giving up? You'll lose everything. The pack, the connection to the natural world, even the ability to understand what any of this meant. I understand perfectly. Maya stepped toward him across the flowing streams of light, and each footstep felt like tearing away pieces of her soul. The wolves followed, their forms becoming more solid as her resolve crystallized, but she could feel their bonds to her stretching toward the breaking point. I'm choosing what matters most. But you'll be ordinary, the realm protested, its voice carrying genuine bewilderment. Limited to single awareness, trapped in linear time, unable to perceive the vast interconnectedness that gives existence meaning. You will have traded infinity for one finite life. Maya reached Ethan's position by the upward-flowing stream. This close, she could see the cosmic fire burning behind his eyes, the terrible beauty of consciousness expanded beyond human limits. He was already becoming something magnificent and inhuman, and she was asking him to give that up. That's exactly what I'm doing, she said, extending her hand to him, trading infinity for one finite life. Because that finite life is my brother's, and that's all the meaning I need. The wolves had formed their protective circle one final time, but Maya could feel their distress bleeding through the pack bond. They had risked everything to help her reach this moment, only to watch her prepare to sever the very connections that made their sacrifice worthwhile. Pack leader, she sent to the Alpha, her mental voice heavy with grief. I release you from all bonds. When I make this trade, you'll be free to choose your own path, back to the physical world or forward into whatever lies beyond. The great wolf's response came laden with centuries of wild wisdom. We chose to follow you not for power, but for loyalty. That choice remains unchanged. Ethan stared at Maya's outstretched hand as if it were a weapon pointed at his heart. If you do this, you won't remember what it felt like to run with wolves in your mind. You won't recall the sensation of consciousness expanded across multiple dimensions. You'll just be human. I've been human for 17 years, Maya replied. It's not such a terrible thing to be. The threshold realm gathered itself around them, preparing to witness an exchange that violated every principle of cosmic justice. Power willingly surrendered, infinity rejected in favor of limitation. Transcendence abandoned for the sake of mortal love. Your terms are acceptable, the realm said finally. But understand, this sacrifice cannot be undone. You will return to linear existence with no memory of what you've experienced here, no connection to the forces you've commanded. You will age and die and return to dust, and the wolves will forget your name. Maya felt the first tendrils of severance beginning, her expanded awareness contracting like a star collapsing into itself. The pack bond flickered, sending waves of anguish through 10 loyal hearts as their connection to her started to fray. But as the cosmic fire began to drain from her consciousness, Maya discovered something the realm hadn't anticipated. Love didn't require mystical connections to endure. The fierce protectiveness she felt for Ethan, the gratitude toward the wolves who had risked everything for her cause, the stubborn loyalty that had brought her this far, those emotions existed independently of supernatural power. I'm ready, she said, grasping Ethan's hand as reality began to reconstruct itself around them. Take us home. The threshold realm collapsed inward, drawing her wolf speaker abilities into itself like a whirlpool consuming light. Maya felt herself becoming smaller, more finite, more human with each passing second. But her grip on her brother's hand never wavered. The sensation of falling through layers of existence was like drowning in reverse, each level bringing her closer to the surface of ordinary reality rather than pulling her deeper into mystery. Maya felt her consciousness compressing, the vast awareness that had allowed her to perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously folding in on itself until she was once again trapped behind the narrow windows of human senses. The last thing she remembered was Ethan's hand in hers, solid and warm and undeniably real. Then came the cold. Maya's eyes opened to grey dawn light filtering through the gaps in weathered barn boards. Her body ached with a bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of trials barely remembered, and frost had gathered in her hair during the night. For a moment she lay perfectly still, trying to grasp fragments of a dream that felt more real than the hay-scented air she was breathing. Wolves. There had been wolves, hadn't there? And Ethan. Maya? The voice was hesitant, uncertain but unmistakably her brother's. She turned her head and found Ethan sitting against the barn wall a few feet away, his clothes torn and dirty, his face gaunt with exhaustion. But his eyes were clear and focused, completely, recognizably human. Ethan. The name came out as a croak, her throat raw from cold and dehydration. She struggled to sit up, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated. "You're here. You're real." "I'm real." He moved closer, his own motions careful and pained, though I'm not entirely sure how. "The last few days are strange, fragmented, like trying to remember a dream that keeps slipping away." Maya nodded, understanding completely. Her own memories of recent events felt similarly elusive. Impressions of impossible landscapes and cosmic voices, the sensation of consciousness expanded beyond human limits, 10 pairs of golden eyes watching over her with fierce devotion. But the harder she tried to focus on those memories, the more they dissolved into something that felt like elaborate fantasy. "The storm," she said, grasping for concrete details. "I was looking for you. I made it to the barn before." She gestured vaguely at their surroundings, unable to articulate the gap between that moment and this one. "I was lost," Ethan said quietly. "Not just geographically. I was somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't quite real, but felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. And then you were there, pulling me back." They sat in silence for several minutes, both struggling with the impossible task of reconciling fragmented memories with their current reality. The barn felt ordinary now, nothing more than an abandoned structure offering shelter from the elements. But Maya could swear she caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, shadows that seemed too purposeful, too coordinated to be mere tricks of light. "Maya." Ethan's voice carried a note of wonder. "Look." She followed his gaze toward the barn's main entrance, where the doors stood slightly ajar. There, arranged in a rough semicircle, sat 10 wolves. They were motionless as statues, their golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "How long have they been there?" she whispered. "I don't know. They were here when I woke up, just watching, like they're waiting for something." Maya studied the wolves, searching for any trace of the mystical connection she felt certain had once existed between them. But there was nothing. No telepathic bond, no shared consciousness, no sense of pack loyalty that transcended species barriers. They were simply wild animals, magnificent but utterly separate from her human experience. And yet, they had stayed. One of the wolves, the largest, with silver-streaked fur and scars marking its muzzle, took a single step forward. For a heartbeat, Maya thought she saw something almost like recognition in its ancient eyes. Then it turned and melted back into the forest shadows, followed by the rest of the pack until only disturbed snow marked their presence. "We should go," Ethan said finally. "Dad's probably organized half the park service by now." Maya nodded, though she found herself reluctant to leave the barn. Something important had happened here. She was certain of that, even if the details remained frustratingly out of reach. But Ethan was right. Their father would be frantic with worry, and they both needed medical attention. As they stepped out into the crisp morning air, Maya caught one final glimpse of movement among the trees. A flash of grey fur, a pair of golden eyes watching them from a distance. Then nothing but wind-stirred branches and the ordinary sounds of a forest waking up. "Ready?" Ethan asked, shouldering his backpack. Maya took one last look at the barn, at the tree line where she thought she'd seen the wolves, at the mountain landscape that suddenly felt both familiar and strange. Whatever had happened here, whatever choice she had made in dreams or visions or impossible realities, it had brought her brother home. That was enough. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. They walked in comfortable silence for the first mile, their boots crunching through snow that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the strengthening sunlight. Maya found herself hyper-aware of ordinary details, the way her breath misted in the cold air, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead, the familiar weight of her backpack against her shoulders. Everything felt sharper somehow, as if she were experiencing the physical world with fresh eyes. "There," Ethan said, pointing toward a ridge ahead where a pillar of black smoke rose against the pale sky. "That's got to be a search team." Maya nodded, but something made her pause. In the distance, barely visible among the trees, she caught a flash of movement. The wolves were following them, maintaining their distance but clearly tracking their progress. She opened her mouth to tell Ethan, then closed it again. Something told her this was meant to be private, a farewell she couldn't quite understand. "Maya, Ethan," the voice carried across the morning air, rough with exhaustion and relief. Their father emerged from the tree line ahead, flanked by 2 park rangers and a search dog. Jack Blackwater looked like he'd aged years in the few days they'd been gone, his face gaunt with worry, his ranger uniform rumpled and stained. But when he saw them walking toward him under their own power, apparently unharmed, his composure cracked entirely. "Thank God," he breathed, breaking into a run. "Thank God you're both all right." Maya found herself swept into a fierce embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. Her father smelled of coffee and smoke, and the particular mix of fear and determination she'd learned to associate with search and rescue operations. Over his shoulder, she watched Ethan being similarly enveloped by one of the other rangers, Bill Chen, who'd known them since childhood. "We've had teams out for 3 days, Jack said, his voice muffled against Maya's hair. "When the storm hit and you didn't come back, I thought—" He pulled away to study her face, his hands gripping her shoulders as if afraid she might disappear again. "Are you hurt? Either of you?" "We're okay, Dad," Maya said, and was surprised to find it was mostly true. Despite the exhaustion and the strange gaps in her memory, she felt more grounded than she had in months. Tired, hungry, but okay. Ethan nodded agreement, though Maya noticed he kept glancing toward the forest edges with an expression she recognized. He was searching for something, or someone, that wasn't quite there anymore. The ranger team's radio crackled to life, Bill reporting their successful recovery and requesting medical evacuation. Within minutes, Maya could hear the distant thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the mountain air. "What happened out there?" Jack asked, as they waited for the chopper to arrive. "We found your trail leading toward the old mining area, but then the snow covered everything. Where have you been for 3 days? Maya exchanged glances with Ethan. How could they explain something they didn't fully understand themselves? The fragments of memory she could grasp felt too large, too impossible to translate into ordinary language. "I got lost," Ethan said finally. "Really lost. Maya found me." It was the truth, Maya realized, even if it wasn't the whole truth. She had found him, somewhere, beyond the edge of the world she knew, in a place where human limitations became voluntary choices rather than unchangeable facts. And she had brought him home by choosing those limitations willingly. The helicopter's roar grew louder as it approached their position. Maya found herself studying her father's face, noting details that seemed newly significant, the crow's feet around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into wilderness distances, the grey threading through his dark hair, the particular way he held himself that balanced authority with deep, instinctive care. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, "for worrying you, for running off without thinking it through." Jack's expression softened. "You were trying to find your brother. I understand that impulse, believe me. But Maya—" He paused, struggling with something. "I know I haven't been easy to live with since your mother died. I know I've been so focused on keeping you both safe that I forgot you might need something more than safety." Maya felt tears stinging her eyes. This was what she'd been hoping for during all those months of careful rebellion and frustrated silences, not permission to be reckless, but acknowledgement that she was growing into someone who could make her own choices about risk and responsibility. "We'll figure it out," she said. "All of it. Together." As the rescue helicopter settled into the clearing, kicking up clouds of snow and pine needles, Maya took one last look at the forest surrounding them. For just a moment she thought she saw them again. 10 pairs of golden eyes watching from the shadows, patient and eternal and wild beyond human understanding. Then the medical team was approaching with emergency gear. Ethan was being helped toward the helicopter, and her father was guiding her away from the tree line toward safety and warmth and the complicated business of returning to ordinary life. But as they lifted off into the brightening sky, Maya pressed her face to the aircraft's window and watched the wilderness fall away beneath them. Somewhere down there, she knew, the wolves were returning to their own ancient paths through the mountains, carrying with them secrets she could no longer remember but would never quite forget. The medical team kept Maya and Ethan overnight at the regional hospital for observation, but their tests revealed nothing more concerning than dehydration and exhaustion. By evening, they were released into their father's care, and Maya found herself riding through familiar mountain roads toward home, as if the past few days had been nothing more than an extended camping trip gone slightly wrong. But everything felt different. The ranch house looked smaller somehow when they pulled into the gravel driveway, its yellow porch light creating a warm circle in the gathering dusk. Jack had called ahead, and Maya could see movement in the kitchen window, their neighbor Mrs. Kowalski bustling around, no doubt preparing enough food to feed half the county. "I kept your room exactly the same," Jack said as they climbed the front steps. His voice carried an awkward uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure what normal conversation should sound like after almost losing both his children to the wilderness. "In case you wanted to change anything." Maya paused on the threshold, one hand on the familiar screen door handle. The mundane gesture felt monumentally significant, like crossing back into a life she'd almost forgotten belonged to her. Through the mesh, she could see the living room where she'd spent countless evenings doing homework while her father reviewed ranger reports. The same worn leather couch, the same stack of wildlife magazines on the coffee table, the same framed photographs of her mother scattered throughout the room, like anchors to a happiness that felt both distant and immediate. "It's perfect the way it is," she said, and meant it. Dinner passed in comfortable chaos. Mrs. Kowalski had indeed prepared enough food for an army, and Bill Chen stopped by with 2 other rangers who wanted to hear the story of their survival firsthand. Maya found herself editing heavily as she spoke, focusing on practical details like shelter and water sources, while carefully omitting the fragments of impossible memory that still flickered at the edges of her consciousness. But she noticed Ethan watching her during those conversations with an expression of shared understanding. He remembered something too, maybe not the same things she did, but enough to recognize the weight of experiences that couldn't be translated into ordinary language. Later, after their guests had gone, and Jack had finally stopped hovering long enough to take a shower, Maya stood in her bedroom doorway and surveyed the space that had been hers for 17 years. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Textbooks stacked on the desk, climbing gear organized in the corner, photographs of mountain landscapes taped to the walls. But she felt like she was seeing it through new eyes, as if she'd returned from a journey much longer than 3 days. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ethan appeared in the hallway, looking as displaced as she felt. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "It's like I'm homesick for somewhere I can't remember," Maya said. "Does that sound crazy?" "Nothing sounds crazy anymore." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes I think I can almost hear something calling from the mountains, like there's a conversation happening just outside my range of hearing." Maya nodded. She'd been experiencing something similar, moments when the wind through the trees or the distant howl of coyotes seemed to carry messages meant specifically for her. But when she tried to focus on the sensation, it dissolved like morning mist. "Do you think we'll ever remember what really happened out there?" she asked. "Maybe we're not supposed to," Ethan said. "Maybe the important thing isn't remembering, but carrying forward whatever it taught us." Over the following weeks, Maya gradually settled back into the rhythms of ordinary life. She returned to school, caught up on missed assignments, and endured the carefully casual questions of teachers who'd heard about her wilderness adventure. But she found herself approaching familiar routines with subtle changes that she couldn't quite articulate. She was more patient with her father's protective instincts, understanding now that his caution came from love rather than lack of faith in her abilities. When he suggested she consider a career in wildlife biology instead of pursuing her previous plan to leave Montana as soon as possible, she found herself genuinely interested in the idea. Most surprisingly, she discovered that her legendary ability to read animal behavior had intensified rather than disappeared. During a family camping trip to test everyone's nerves, Maya found herself anticipating the movements of deer and mountain goats with an accuracy that amazed even her father. She couldn't explain the enhancement any more than she could remember its source, but she was grateful for it. On their last night of that camping trip, Maya woke to find moonlight streaming through the tent walls. Something had called her from sleep. Not a sound exactly, but a presence that felt both wild and familiar. She unzipped the tent flap as quietly as possible and stepped into the silver-washed clearing. 10 wolves sat in a perfect circle around their campsite, motionless as sentinels. They weren't threatening or even particularly close, but their presence felt intentional, almost ceremonial. Maya stood frozen in wonder, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had brought them here. The largest wolf, scarred and silver-streaked, ancient beyond measure, met her eyes across the space between worlds. For just an instant, Maya felt an echo of something vast and interconnected, a reminder of bonds that transcended the boundaries between species and consciousness. Then the moment passed. The wolves melted back into the forest shadows, leaving only the ordinary sounds of wind and water and her own quietly thundering heart. Maya smiled as she returned to the tent. Some mysteries she was learning were more beautiful when they remained unsolved. Some gifts were precious precisely because they existed at the edges of understanding, reminding her that the world would always be larger and stranger and more wonderful than human knowledge could encompass. She had chosen her finite, human life freely, trading infinity for love. But love, it turned out, had its own kind of magic, one that didn't require supernatural powers to sustain it and couldn't be diminished by the limitations of ordinary existence. As she drifted back toward sleep, Maya could have sworn she heard the distant song of wolves carried on the mountain wind, a wild music that spoke of loyalty and sacrifice, and the enduring connections that bind all living things together in ways too deep for memory but too true for forgetting.